first part is about what our society is like. And Pope Gregory VII will play a very important role in that account. And then the second part is a series of thought experiments, which I'm going to rely on you to give me input for. And how that works, I'm not quite sure yet, since I've never done this before. These ideas were developed long before there were such things as PowerPoint slides. But we'll see. It's an experiment. All right, so these are various ideas which have been put forward in the course of time about what the key might be to leading a meaningful life. And the obvious key is that if you lead a happy life, then you lead a meaningful life. And then there are various other ideas that people have put forward in history. The thesis I'm going to defend is rather towards the end of this list. So living creatively would be a fairly good first approximation. And changing the world would be also a fairly good approximation, but neither of these completely capture the central position here, which will become clear only as we move forward. So the basis is Durkheim's taxonomy of suicides, and different kinds of cultures have different kinds of suicide. And studying the phenomenon of suicide, you can also understand what it is to be leading a meaningful life. Basically, people who do not lead meaningful lives are more likely to commit suicide. And so there is, first of all, altruistic suicide, which is a phenomenon where somebody begins to feel that it's their duty to commit suicide. As for instance, in Japan, in the phenomenon of harakiri. So you feel that you have to commit suicide because otherwise the world will not be an organic place, because you don't belong in it anymore. And a subform of altruistic suicide is terroristic suicide. The suicide who, as an act of jihad, kills himself in order to send a message to God or something like that. The next kind, distinguished by Durkheim, was anomic suicide. And this arises in periods of social breakdown. So in a stock market crash, you have people who commit suicide because the world seems to becoming unintelligible and everything is going wrong. And then you have fatalistic suicide, which occurs when people can't cope with the rules that surround them. They feel as if they're being strangled by society, and they have no way of coping under these conditions, and so they end their own lives. And then finally, and this is the most important one, we have what Durkheim called egoistic suicide. And this is a case where individuals may be living in a perfectly good, happy society, but they feel that their own lives are meaningless. So this is the key to the story I'm going to be telling. Now, in traditional societies, this feeling of meaninglessness is avoided because people are living in traditional societies or communities. There's a strong collective consciousness. People trust each other, they rely on each other, they're integrated, and this is often a matter of religion. And in such societies, people are indeed less likely to commit suicide. They belong, things have meaning. For some reason, I just lost the light. Can you hear the voice still?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so just give me 1 minute, see if I can switch a light on, which doesn't cause too many problems. I guess you don't notice the loss of light because you're only seeing my slides, but still, we'll go on. So the traditional road to a meaningful life, most societies in human history was through a community of trust, strong integration into society. We're not living in a society like that anymore. And yet there is not a high level of suicide. Why? In virtue of what do people not commit suicide today? given that the sources of meaning of former times are weakened so considerably. That's the puzzle that I'm going to try and solve. I think that most people in developed societies today are leading mostly meaningful lives. And that's why we don't have particularly high suicide rates. And so the question is, what does it mean to lead a meaningful life if not to be part of a traditional community? To put the thing in another direction, what provides meaning in a modern society? Well, this is where Gregory VII comes into the story. And the account I'm giving of Gregory VII is based on these two writings, which I strongly recommend, particularly the Berman piece. So Gregory faced what was then thought of as the year 1000 problem. So some of you will remember, in fact, all of you, I imagine, will remember the Y2K problem. I'm not even sure whether the younger people actually will remember the Y2K problem, but all of the older people in the audience will remember the Y2K problem. There was a Y1K problem. Jesus did not come back. Everyone was expecting Jesus to come back at the end of the millennium. And this was a big embarrassment for the church and specifically for Pope Gregory. And so he responded to this embarrassment in an encyclical, which was disseminated in the year 1076. And this encyclical introduced a new, we might think of it as a post-religious view of humanity. Or anyway, it's a post-apocalyptic view of humanity. According to this view, what you do here on earth is important for your salvation. Now, this was a radical change. The idea was that the reason why Christ did not return is because the world wasn't good enough for him yet. So we had 1,000 years to make the world a good enough place for Christ, and we failed. And so Pope Gregory wants to try again, but this time on the basis of what today we would think of as reason, free choice, acts of will, science, and so forth. And so the encyclical was all about making the world a better place. The first component was the adoption of Roman law. So there would be a new universal legislation. The whole of Christian society would be under one legal system. The legal system, which was introduced by the Romans, of course, but which was now going to be passed through to the whole of society, so that we would rationally organize our social lives and even our private lives on the basis of what we would, again, nowadays think of as economic principles. And this is the birth of the modern idea of the Rechtsstaat, the idea of a state of laws rather than a state in which your position in society mattered more than the objective statements of the law. And this was also a basis for a new kind of politics. The book by Berman that I recommended a few slides ago is actually all about the relationship, the new relationship between the law on the one hand and the church on the other hand. That relationship is now so completely familiar to the way we see everything that we don't think about it. But in the year 10,076, matters were quite different. The intimate connection between the church and the state was, as it still is in certain Islamic countries today. And then the law served as a basis for a new kind of economics. The ideas of a just wage, for instance, and similar ideas were introduced at this time. So you use legal proceedings to settle disputes. You don't use violence or the whim of some lord or king. Law is impersonal. And it's known, it's made of abstract rules. And so a more structured, ordered society comes into being. Now, if I were to jump ahead 47 slides or so, I would point here to the thesis that a meaningful life is a structured, ordered life. And what that means will become clear later on. But this idea of a structured, ordered life is rooted in this primeval document of the modern age, namely the encyclical of Pope Gregory VII. Okay, so other elements, not just law, but also universities were established. So 1088 already, only 12 years later, the first university was founded in Bologna, which was actually a center for the study of law more than anything else, law and medicine. And then Oxford and Paris and Cambridge and Schenectady followed in the obvious order. The characteristic of these new universities, to a greater or lesser degree, was the idea that we should search for knowledge for its own sake. This was an idea which came from the Greeks, which was reinvented, as it were, by Pope Gregory, and then disseminated by Pope Gregory through universities and through monasteries, which often were responsible for teaching the children who would go on to be monks in these new universities, who also spread new ideas in agriculture and viticulture and so forth, and medicine, of course. All of this is part of the same new project to make the world a better place. Beautiful buildings, nice food, nice drink, healthy people, healthy animals, and so forth. So we are now to be living in a world which we understand, which we improve, not which we affect through prayer or apocalypse, but through good works and sound institutions. Now, before that, we had the threat of hell and damnation and so forth. And we had the problem of original sin. So original sin is infinitely bad. The small things that human beings can do in their lives for the good are of no value when compared to the infinitely negative value of original sin. And so the idea until Gregory was, I'm simplifying a lot now, I hope you're clear about that, human action has no value. And so the moral order or the legal order under which you live is arbitrary. It could be that everything is subject to the whim of the gods. This is the problem which people like Gregory faced. This means there is no measure on earth. That's going to be important later on. To lead a meaningful life, you have to lead a life which is conforming to a standard or measure. So if you're living in a world in which everything is subject to the whims of the gods, then you may as well just abstain from acting completely. That might indeed be the holy way, the righteous way to lead your life. Or you may isolate yourself. Or you may appeal to supernatural forces, for instance, when you're deciding whether somebody is guilty of some kind of crime or sin. And you may believe in prayer as having a causal power, or you may believe in relics. Because in this magical world where everything might be subject to the whim of the gods, reason does not really necessarily bring you anywhere. And now Anselm was one of the people who codified, as it were, or philosophized about this new institution of worldly order brought about by Gregory. So I believe in order to know is the creed. And in order to know, in order to make the world better via reason in small steps. Now, this means that the small steps of individual humans become meaningful once again. You yourself can determine that you will be saved by good works, because human life here on earth matters, because we are here on earth to make the world better so that Jesus Christ will come back. So this is Anselm's new balance sheet. The original view was that all our good works are infinitely outweighed by original sin. Now Anselm says that we have original sin and the actual sins, and the actual sins are, of course, irrelevant because they are eaten away by the infinity of original sin. But the infinity of original sin is balanced out by Christ's sacrifice. And so good works matter. And we can count them and we can see that they matter because they bring meaningful changes which make the world a better place. And this applies also to crimes. So now you pay your debt to society by serving time in jail. There is a measure on earth. The time you spend in jail is proportionate to the crime or the sin that you committed. And this too is part of the new legal order which Gregory introduced. So this has implications also for the doctrine of purgatory. So it's never too late to start doing good. You can even do good after you're dead in order to increase your chance of going to heaven. Now, just as going to jail gives you a chance to atone for your sins before death, so purgatory gives you a chance to atone for your sins before either you go to heaven or to hell. Going to jail means that you can wipe the slate clean, and this is the idea of criminal justice. It's part of a new idea called guilt. So we're now living in a guilt society, where before people were living in a shame society. And again, there was no measure. If you did something wrong, then the shame that you acquired would affect not only you, but your whole family and all your descendants for all eternity. So shame is impurgable. And purgatory and unpurgable I have here. They come from the same root. And if you suffer shame, as in harakiri again, then suicide may be the only solution. That is the only way that you can pay the debt which will otherwise accrue to all your descendants for all eternity. Suicide is honorable. Suicide is part of a meaningful life according to the culture of shame, but not according to the culture of the modern world introduced by Gregory. So the old path of salvation was just one big jump, if you're lucky. The new path of salvation allows you to proceed in a measured way from earth, where you perform good works, to heaven, where you receive the reward for your good works. So, according to all of this, salvation is no longer an all or nothing matter. You can make use of your reason and thereby receive salvation. And in the second piece of literature that I referred to by a French political philosopher by the name of Nemo, the West, he has a book about the West, is defined as a scientific and legal civilization based on this principle, namely that life here on earth matters. All right, so the West means those societies which fell under the influence of the Gregorian reforms, which includes North America, South America, and Silicon Valley, for instance, all of the other things that we are surrounded by, the technological world in which we live. This is all part of the West, and it's all a reflection of people doing good works in order to make the world a better place, according to Gregory's original scheme of things. Now, if life here on earth is meaningful, then that means that the church and the state are separated. The state and all of the things that private people do and all of the things that companies do are separate from the issues which relate to heaven and hell, issues of the church. So a materially successful society can also be a moral and religious society, and that may be connected too with the idea of meaningfulness. It's something we have to see. But it's not the same thing. A successful society and a moral and religious society, they point in two different directions. The two issues are orthogonal to each other. And that's because life here on earth is significant. God and society can be separated. There are other moral forms of social order other than theocratic totalitarianism. All right, so now let's go to the meaning of life. We finished with Pope Gregory. One very attractive summary of the meaning of life, and again, for people who live in modern societies, is that we get meaning in our lives from helping others. So Mother Teresa is the ideal to which we can all think of ourselves as approximating in little ways, small steps. So we are all here to help others. This is W.H. Auden, an English poet of a somewhat, what's the word, doom-laden spirit. So we're all here to help others. But what the others are here for, says W.H. Auden, God only knows. So there has to be some things that we're here for which are not for others, because those others have to be doing something which it's worth helping them to do. So that's the first small thought experiment. Now, if you think I'm making a mistake in my logic or in my rhetoric here, then from this point onwards, you should just feel free to interrupt, and you can shout. I'm sure we'll all hear, providing you're not muted. All right, so Socrates and the happy dog. This is an old challenge question. Which is it better to be, an unhappy Socrates or a happy dog? Now, viewed from the idea of meaningfulness, assuming that you want to lead a meaningful life, I think it's obvious that we would all like to be Socrates. And that if we're unhappy, that's not really important, because we are doing good works. We are engaging with the world. We're acting. We're getting some kind of feedback response. And even if we end up committing suicide or being killed by our surroundings, by the people that we engage with, we're still leading a meaningful life, where the happy dog is not leading a meaningful life. And now I'm assuming that many people have heard of the experience machine described by Nozick. And I have talked about this in public. And I have rooms of students, and I challenge them with Nozick's question. The question goes something like this. I have a super duper machine, which looks a bit like a MRI machine, which you can go into, and then I'll close the door forever. And this, my machine is insured by the best Swiss insurance company that you could imagine. If anything goes wrong, your family will receive $4 billion or something. And nothing does go wrong. I have thousands and thousands of happy customers who are happy that they're inside the machine. The rule is you can't come back out. But if you do go inside the machine, then your life will continue just as it was before. You will have just the same experiences, the same family, surroundings, and so forth, except you will be more successful, more happy. You will engage in more meaningful experiences. In general, everything will be better than it is if you stay outside the machine. There will be even occasional downfalls. You will suffer accidents and so forth, but you will suffer just the right number of accidents to make your life the most perfect life that it could be for someone like you, but in a way that you don't notice the change. It will all be very gradual. And then the challenge is, do you go into the machine? Now, if there is anyone in the audience who would go into the machine, I would like them to make themselves known. So I infer from this that you're all leading rather happy, satisfied lives. Am I correct? Is that the rough and ready reason? If somebody has a different reason, I'd be very happy to hear it. So you're all just not going in because you're already happy. Is that no deeper reason?
I'm not going in because I want to live an authentic life.
Very good. So that is actually on my list of definitions of a meaningful life. A meaningful life is an authentic life. Do you want to define what you mean by authentic?
So I wanted to be in touch with reality, I guess. I don't know if that's the same thing or if that's something different.
No, but it's closely connected. In fact, you're hitting several nails on the head, even with that one phrase, as you will see as we go along. So I'm very happy that at least one person reacted. Now, is someone going to be the second person? Just as a matter of interest, to the talking person from a second ago, have you heard about the experience machine in your class here at Union College?
Oh yeah, I'm a faculty member. I was talking about it in class last week.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not repeating things you already said.
No, this is good.
So anyone else want to volunteer?
I was hoping the students would jump in, but I will just echo what David says. I teach the experience machine in my intro class, and I'm always surprised at how many students say that sign me up, put me in. But I agree with David. I would rather stay in touch with reality.
So I'm going to give you several reasons why you should not go in before we're finished. I'm sure you'll recognize all of them, but probably not listed in the way that I list them.
Are there any students who would want to stay in the machine or go in the machine or not? There's some students here. I've outed them, so they're like, I'm not gonna.
So they've all seen the film The Matrix, I imagine, and so they think of the experience machine as in rather dark terms. All right, so let's move on then. So the meaning of life cannot be just happiness, being happy, because you get much more happiness in the experience machine than you do in the real world. In fact, you get the perfect amount of happiness that would make your life the perfect life. It's just not really a life that you're living. It's kind of ersatz. And one reason is that you're not acting freely. So the machine is determining everything that happens to you because the machine is determining that flow of experiences which you enjoy. And that flow of experiences includes experiences according to which you are acting freely. So you think you're acting freely at every moment inside the machine, but you're never acting. It's all just a feed from the computer. So then the question is, why is free action important? Where free action means that you're not just thinking that you're acting freely, but you truly are acting freely. Now, John Stuart Mill had an answer to this question. He was thinking actually about freedom of speech, but we can generalize. So freedom means that you have more alternative views, options, actions, and so forth to choose from. And now, I don't think that this kind of answer to the question is quite good enough, because just having more alternatives doesn't necessarily mean that you have more meaningfulness. In fact, having more alternatives may take away some of the meaning from your life. So I remember in the time when people living in communist countries could travel to the West for the first time, I had a Polish philosopher who visited me in Switzerland. And I took him to a Swiss cheese shop, which was just a shop full of cheese. In Poland, under communism, you had perhaps 2 alternative kinds of cheese to choose from. And on any given day, it may be that both of them were sold out. In this Swiss cheese shop, he had thousands of different kinds of cheeses, and he hated it. He said that this was bad, it was wasteful, you shouldn't have so many kinds of cheese. Anyway, so now we're coming in at random from a completely different direction. There is a story about a university in Saudi Arabia which had a board of directors who'd been placed in charge of the university, and then they issued instructions to the faculty explaining exactly what and how they are to teach. Now, all the faculty on this Zoom exchange, I know, would hate to be a member of the faculty of a university like that. So they want to decide what and how they are to teach. And I'm hoping that the students want to be in a university where faculty are explaining what, so deciding what and how they are to teach. Now, why? Supposing that we could go to a university which we knew would teach exactly what we want in exactly the way we want it, because all the teachers in that university were instructed to do that. Would we still want to go to that university? I think we would not, because we want, and someone earlier used the word authentic, we want the faculty to be authentically believing in what they're teaching. We want them to believe that it's true and not be retelling what they've been instructed to believe by the university board of directors. So why is it important not merely to do the right thing, but to do the right thing of your own free will? And the answer, I think, has to do with a distinction between real feelings, which are well grounded in a way that I will explain, and fake feelings. So this is another view on the idea of authenticity. Now, another question, which is parallel to the first question, is why is it important to have genuine achievements rather than achievements which bring, or rather than actions which bring all the marks of genuine achievements, but are not genuine achievements? Now, an example here would be, you have a rich uncle, a very rich uncle, and he wants you to go through life being successful. And so he pays all the people in your surroundings to praise everything that you do. So all the faculty members are told to give you good marks. They get well rewarded. All your friends are told to praise you all the time for being so witty and so forth. So you have all the marks of success, but you don't actually do any of the things which would justify those marks of success. So what we all feel that this would be a horrible thing to do to somebody, even though, in fact, they experience all of the positive marks of success. The uncle does this for the whole life of this poor person. Why do we feel that they are a poor person? Why do we feel that it would be a bad thing to live in a world where they were enjoying only fake success? And the answer is something like, your feelings should track the reality around you. So that's what a meaningful life, I believe, has to be. It has to be a life in which your feelings and your beliefs and so forth track reality. Now, another example would be, you want to get to the top of a mountain, and you have two ways to get to the top of the mountain. You can either climb the mountain, or you can get your rich uncle to deposit you on the top of the mountain, having hypnotized you to believe that you were climbing up the mountain. So he has a helicopter and a hypnotist. When you get to the top of the mountain, you think you climbed the mountain, so you feel successful, you feel that you have achieved something, but you haven't achieved something. You're experiencing fake success. All right, so what is a genuine achievement? It's an activity directed towards a goal, along with a measure of how well you realize the goal, a standard of right or wrong. So getting to the top of the mountain, the obvious measure is that how far you get, and ideally you get to the top. Now, if you want to lead a meaningful life, then presumably you want to lead a maximally meaningful life. And that would seem to mean that the goal of your life, or the goal that you embrace, the prime goal of your life, must be far in the future. Ideally, you should realize the goal 1 second before you die. Now, that probably is not going to work, but still, I hope we all feel that if meaningfulness is a value, then we should try and maximize it. And if meaningfulness, as I shall argue, is a matter of having genuine achievements, and if genuine achievements is a matter of having a measure, then we want to maximize the measure. So we want to have this step from earth to heaven, and we want the steps to go directly to heaven, but by tiny steps, like this. So this is now paths to meaningfulness.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So okay. So do I have to? I mean, do I have to believe that the goal is kind of far away in the future, or the goal has to be far away in the future?
So I can't think of a case where the goal would be so far in the future, but I'm going to talk quite a bit about Beethoven later on. So let's take Beethoven as the example. Beethoven wrote symphonies. He wrote works of music. Each one of those works of music is a step, and then he dies. Now, he didn't have a goal that was fulfilled just before he died, but he was fulfilling a goal through his life, which was to write music. Does that make sense?
Okay, sorry. So maybe I'm not making sense, so I have to think that I have a goal. And
that's a good question. Which actually, I do not have a slide devoted to that question, which disappoints me. So I've not achieved my goal. Let me write it down. So I do have a very similar question. I think it's on the next slide. But it's a good question. So let me give you the similar question. Do other people have to know the measure of success? So I guess you could, do I have to know the measure of success? I have to think about that given your question, but let me do this one first. So it's not the case that other people have to know the measure of success while the genuine achievement is going on. So the resistance fighters in France in the Second World War were not allowed to tell people what they were doing. They could not be applauded. That the measure of success did indeed become clear after the war, and then they were appropriately rewarded. Most of them were dead, of course, but they received their measure of success. Another example is Aristarchus, who discovered that the Earth orbits around the sun, but he was ignored then for 1853 years. But he still has his measure of success. We all think now that Aristarchus led a meaningful life. And I think we think that truly. I don't know if that helps you in any way, but I can try and answer your question now if you wish.
sure, yeah.
Okay, so
Makes sense.
Thinking through, so I like to think through great composers, Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart, because they are the paradigms of meaningful lives, according to the view I'm defending now. Now, I'm sure that Bach had a goal, which was to glorify God. And so he would be a case where my account would fit with a positive answer to your question. Bach led a meaningful life, and he had a goal which he was aiming to realize through his whole life. I think also I can give a positive answer to the question with regard to Beethoven. He wanted to create music, wanted really hard so that it was painful for him towards the end. And with regard to Mozart, we're not so sure about Mozart. He seems to be a less clear case whether he had a goal like Beethoven or Bach. I'm just talking off the top of my head now. I haven't thought this through. Am I making any sort of sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so
I'm not sure I understand the format. Can I jump in right now?
Anyone can jump in at any time, although that makes all our lives slightly less meaningful because we're deviating from the plan. But so, I can live with that.
All right, so this is not the question I wanted to ask earlier, but this is piggybacking on Mariana's question.
Yes.
And also with your choice of composers.
Yes.
So take Pushkin's version of the competitiveness between Mozart and Salieri.
Yes.
So apparently, as you yourself said, we're not clear whether Mozart had a goal, was conscious of a goal. But Salieri, in the way that Pushkin, it wasn't popularized in the movie. Tales, whatever. So Salieri had not only less success in terms of the recognition he received, but apparently, I'm not an expert, his music was not nearly as admirable intrinsically as Mozart. And yet he did have the consciousness of the goals
Good,
and so on
good.
and so forth. So, I mean, what are we going to do with that sort of case?
Yeah, so as I did say that I had not thought about this consciousness of the goal dimension, and I'll build it into the thing before I do this again, which may not be for another 30 years, if I'm still here. So let me just explain. The goal is not central to the account. The goal may indeed be just a crutch for thinking about the account. So it is as if you have a goal which is far, far in the future so that you can lead a maximally meaningful life by creating a plan to realize that goal. So the plan is more important than the goal, and the plan is broken down in these successive steps, such as writing symphonies. So I think I'm still in good shape. But yeah, it's up to you to judge. We are 2/3 of the way through. All right. So we've already determined, or at least I've determined, that only a free action can contribute to the meaningfulness of your life. And so the right kind of university is one which helps you to lead a meaningful life. That's the point I wanted to make here. And so everyone who is in uni and college, whether as a faculty member or a student, is, by the very fact that they are in a university doing what they're doing, leading a meaningful life. They are engaging in activities according to a plan which add step by step to some sort of measurable value, even if the measurableness is in terms of diplomas or promotions and so forth. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the hypnotist. Your uncle hires a hypnotist and hypnotizes you into thinking that you are happy. Or this proves that what is going on inside your mind is not necessarily very important in determining whether you're leading a meaningful life or not. We can make you think that you're leading a meaningful life by hypnotizing you. But now, supposing that we have a hypnotist who we pay, and we tell the hypnotist to hypnotize us to do what we want to be hypnotized to do. For instance, giving up smoking, which people do a lot, I understand. They pay a hypnotist to hypnotize them so that they will give up smoking. Supposing we pay a hypnotist to hypnotize us so that we will work much harder on our exams. Does that add to the measure, to the accounting, so that it adds to the meaningfulness of our life? I do not know the answer to this question. So if anyone thinks they have a good answer, I would be happy to hear it. It seems to me that paying a hypnotist to make it easier for you to make your life more meaningful in a real, well-grounded sense is itself well-grounded. In fact, probably more people should do it, if hypnotism works, of course. So if no one has anything to say about this, I will just move on.
Actually, I have something to say, I think, about this. So I don't know if I have an answer to it, but this kind of ties into what I was thinking about with the idea that free action is central to having a meaningful life. And I was thinking about it in terms of like, so I guess to what extent, what do we mean by a free action? I'm thinking it matters to me that what I do is caused by me, which is why I wouldn't want to be in the experience machine, right? I wouldn't want it to be the case that I didn't really earn my PhD, that it was just I just thought I did, that kind of thing. Right. So I think that seems right to me. But then if it turned out that somebody had said, determinism is true, and so you really didn't have a choice in what you were doing, I don't know that bothers me that much. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about this hypnotist example, that if I hire a hypnotist to hypnotize me so I work harder, or I am more successful at the goals that I want, and then somebody says, well, then the action wasn't really free because you had this kind of interference, it still stems from me. I'm still I don't think that I'm not tracking reality anymore. And so in that sense, I'm just thinking that maybe I guess that's what I'm thinking, and I'm wondering to what extent, like how robust does our notion of freedom have to be in this account?
Okay, I like the argument that you just presented. So I'm not going to object to it.
Okay.
And my question still remains: why don't more people pay hypnotists to hypnotize them to work harder? Anyway, let's move on. Unless someone else has something to say. All right. So it has to be the meaning of your life. Can't be the meaning that your uncle would like you to lead. So it has to be you who commands the hypnotist, or it has to be you who climbs the mountain. But now the question is, what is your life? I don't know how many people have watched this Amazon TV series called Upload. So I was able to watch about 15 minutes of it, and then I just stopped because it's so bad. But the idea is rather good. The idea is that in the future, it's a good idea. It will never happen, of course, but in the future, we will be able to become immortal by having the contents of our brains uploaded digitally into the cloud. The cloud is in Montauk. So that's where you go if you pay for the elite service on the digital immortality scheme. And sometimes the digital representation goes wonky. At the edges, it's never quite clear. But still, it's a story according to which the man on the left here dies in a traffic accident, but his girlfriend is very rich and she pays for him to become immortal through digital means. Now, as I said, this is nonsense. That we will never achieve digital immortality because the machines are never conscious. And in order to continue to exist, you would have to continue to exist in such a way that you are conscious. So you wouldn't want to be uploaded into the cloud and never have any experiences. In fact, that would be an experience machine that you would be being uploaded into. And so you wouldn't want to be uploaded anyway because of all the reasons that we discussed earlier on when we dealt with the experience machine of the simple down here on Earth sort. But now, what is your life? So we see that it has to include a consciousness. Presumably, it would have to include the memories that you have. I've heard of people who've maintained that. It would have to include the other people around you, so the people that you can affect. So you would have to at least have the consciousness, memory, and other people around you whom you can affect in order to be worth your while to have your brain uploaded into the cloud. And perhaps another better, so this says the same thing, but more extensively. Another better challenge is the following. Supposing you're in a really horrible traffic accident and you still have consciousness. You can't remember very much and your arms and legs are paralyzed. So the surgeon bends down and looks in your eyes and he says, Mr. Smith, do you want us to save you or do you want us to bring your life to an end? And then the question would be, how much of you would you want to survive before you would say that you want to survive? And so you would want, again, memory, other people whom you can affect, consciousness, but you would also want to be able to perform acts of will. You'd also want to be able to behave spontaneously and creatively and imaginatively. If you couldn't do those things, you probably would say, no, I do not want to be saved. You can harvest my organs. Now, so when we say that it has to be you that performs the free action, then we're understanding you as being a combination of things like this and will, spontaneity, creativity, imagination in a way which can affect others will involve also physical actions. It couldn't just be a matter of exchanging digital messages electronically. Or maybe it could. Maybe we could do mathematics in the cloud. All right, so we talked about the mountaineer who didn't really climb. Another case would be the artist. The rich uncle wants you to think that everybody likes your paintings because you're an artist. And so he buys them all behind your back. And so you think that everyone is buying your paintings. No one would want to be that failed artist. Another example is the failed student. So again, your uncle pays all your student friends and your teachers to give you full marks and praise you all the time. Now, a more interesting one is the failed mathematician. So let's suppose that you are a mathematician and you have proved Fermat's last theorem, took you 40 years, and then you die. But there is a flaw in your theorem. Did you lead a meaningful life? And any takers? No. So I think that you thought you did, because you did experience the experience of proving the theorem, finishing the proof, and maybe you even got applause from your fellow mathematicians. But I don't think you led a meaningful life because it wasn't a valid proof.
Well, but it depends, because if it were me and I'm a good mathematician and my effort really is impressive and so on, and then I die without finding out that I made a major mistake, but the thing is competent, even beautiful math, then of course there was meaning.
But it's not beautiful if there's a mistake in it. Even if it looks beautiful, we have fake beauty too.
Well, but there are mistakes and there are mistakes. If Leo Seibert were to try to prove that theorem and were to be convinced that he did, that would not be beautiful at all. But if a real mathematician might do it and fail, she might fail in ways that are meaningful and worthwhile and so on.
Yeah, but that would be a different kind of story where the theorem does have interesting lessons for the future mathematician. But this is just a case. Well, anyway, I get your point. I agree it's not quite a cut and dried case. But still, the point is that all of these cases would be cases where there is a departure from the truth. And the meaningful life, I think, has to be maximally true in some sense. Or better still, it shouldn't be based on a lie. I think we'd all agree on that. It also shouldn't be based upon a falsehood. And there is a falsehood involved here, which is that he proves the theorem. He did not prove the theorem. And that's a very important difference precisely for mathematicians.
So if I could just jump in for a clarification then. So when we're talking about like the failed artist or the failed student, we're talking about failed insofar as it appeared as though they were successful at their goals, but in fact they were not.
Yeah.
And but what about an actual failed artist? Somebody who dedicated their life to art and just never were successful, and their goal was to create not just art, but to be a successful artist. Does that mean so there's no deception, it's all true, but I'm just curious that does that mean that they didn't live a meaningful life, or they did?
My intuition says that they did not lead a meaningful life. They picked the wrong plan. They should have picked another plan.
Wow, now the stakes are really high for leading a meaningful life. Okay, thank you.
Well, but you described it as failure. It was
I guess so. Now I'm thinking. I mean, so all of this seems very intuitive to me. I think that like truth matters. I think that's right. Now I'm wondering how much does success matter? I don't know.
Success. We already saw that you could be successful without anybody knowing about it for 1,500 years. Mm-hmm. So success in the sense of winning prizes and awards and praise and so forth does not matter. So the mathematician who really does prove the theorem leads a meaningful life, even if no one knows about it for 100 years. And I think I hope anyway, that we all share that intuition. So success is not important. Failed success or fake success is something which may make people think that someone is leading a meaningful life, but they're not.
I I have a question about a couple cases. I'll start with one. What if I don't remember what the name of this profession was, but there were people who their professional goal was to like catalog like Shakespeare, like how many times the word love appears in Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah.
And they spend lots of time. So imagine you like do that your whole life, and then you're very good at it, and then right after you die, Google is able to do this like in seconds.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Unfortunately, it's not a counter example to my basic theory, which I will unveil shortly.
Okay, cool.
So that would not be a meaningful life independently of Google, and I can explain why, I believe.
Okay, can I ask you about my second case?
Please.
I don't know. These are counterexamples. These are just cases I thought were interesting. So I think about two philosophers. One philosopher is like really trying to do something like what the mathematician is doing. They're trying to give sound arguments and discover the truth and prove the truth. And then you have another philosopher who's maybe the way Leo was thinking about a mathematician, where they ultimately don't care. Their goal isn't to necessarily make sound arguments. They're trying to make interesting arguments that can be beautiful, even if they're flawed. Does just like changing like what your goal is affect whether you live a meaningful life in that way? Like it's just like by saying, okay, I'm not aiming for truth, I'm aiming for interesting or something like that. Can that?
Actually, that's a very interesting example. So I think most of our philosopher colleagues are exactly as you described them. Let me. So I think I will take the mathematics and science is one thing. Their truth matters. In philosophy, there's something else which matters, namely argumentative power. And the reason for that, and I'm sure you're familiar with this thought experiment, is that in philosophy, we don't have any empirical tests for the truth or falsity of what a given philosopher claims. And so what we do is we find hard arguments to try and beat down the thesis of the philosopher that we're considering. And so having witty or convincing or beautiful arguments in philosophy is already a value. It's already on the positive side, and so it contributes to the meaningfulness of a philosopher's life. It would not contribute, under the conditions you described, to the meaningfulness of a mathematician's life.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. That was a good one. I'm going to write that one down too. All right. So we talked about the failed mountaineer and the failed artist. Now let's go back to Beethoven. So Beethoven had had a meaningful life. Let's just take that as accepted. Let's suppose that Beethoven, at the age of 42, decides to give up music and take up tennis. And let's suppose, I don't know, when did Beethoven die? Let's suppose he died at 47. So let's suppose at the age of 46 and a half, he gives up music and says to all his friends, I'm going to play tennis for the rest of my life. I think we would say that even though he made exactly the same amount of music in the two lives, we would say that the first life is more meaningful than the second life. He messed up the meaning by messing up the organic unity of a single life. And I think I hope everyone will agree with that. Now let's change it slightly. Let's suppose that Beethoven gives up music at the age of 32, but then becomes a world champion tennis player and invents a whole new ways of playing tennis for the remaining 15 years of his life. Then we would have a problem in deciding how to give Beethoven's life a meaningfulness score, because both segments are meaningful in their own right, but they don't seem to fit together. So that's just a dangling question. I'm not expecting an answer to that. The question does throw light on sport as a channel or an avenue to achieve meaningfulness. The years didn't work for Beethoven, but for ordinary people who are good at sport, they cease to be good rather early on in their lives. And so sport seems to be a bad recipe for achieving a meaningful life. And again, this is not a challenge question. I'm not expecting any sort of response. If you want to respond, then please do so. The Beethoven and mathematics would be the same as the Beethoven and successful tennis player, but this time Beethoven, at the age of 31, decides to become the world's greatest mathematician and succeeds. I find that we would find it much easier to give Beethoven a high meaningfulness score on this scenario than on the Beethoven and championship tennis scenario. And so if someone disagrees with that, then I would be happy to hear an argument, but probably I'm already way out on a limb here. The question we're addressing now is at the bottom. Does meaningfulness imply a single life plan, or can you lead a meaningful life by leading two lives in series, or even by leading two lives in parallel? Could you fulfill serious meaningfulness goals in multiples so that you're achieving two goals in the course of your life? These are just questions. I don't have any answers myself. I just have the questions. I still think, however, that there is a good idea behind the idea that we should plan for maximal meaningfulness. So a meaningful life is a planned life. That's one thesis, which I'm defending. That means, when should you make your plan? Should you make your plan at the earliest possible moment, when you can make the maximally coherent plan to lead to the maximal meaningfulness score? So it shouldn't be too early. It probably shouldn't be at the age of 13, but it probably shouldn't be after the age of 19. And then the question is, what should you plan to do? What are the avenues in which you can maximize the meaningfulness of your life? Now, Plato thought that philosophers led maximally meaningful lives, and that kings led maximally meaningful lives. So the maximally meaningful life would be a philosopher king. But we don't have to go all the way up into that extreme to find a meaningful life, which is meaningful in the sense that there's a very high meaningfulness score which extends over the whole life, which is just family life. So your plan is to raise a family. And this gives you a lifelong goal, which is realized in steps, which involves difficulties, it's not trivial, and which goes on for all eternity. So this is the princely. I lived in Liechtenstein for a short time. And every year the Prince of Liechtenstein organizes a national party in the grounds around his palace, which is on the top right-hand corner there. And this family has a family contract. It's part of the law of Liechtenstein, the family law of the Liechtenstein family, which goes back to the 11th century. And they have a plan which extends over 1,000 years, or nearly 1,000 years, and which will extend much further if they keep going on as they are. And so this really is a route to having an exceedingly meaningful life. This is the law of the princely house of Liechtenstein, which is part of the law of the country called Liechtenstein. All right, so when should you begin? Age 19. What should you do? Well, some ideas. We've gone through two obvious ones, but science and medicine we've sort of considered, or mathematics, of course. Artistic creativity, music. Teachers lead meaningful lives which go on after their lives, so they affect others in very meaningful ways. Builders who build buildings, or carpenters who make chairs, they all lead meaningful lives, which again leave behind something which affects people for the life hereafter. So all of these are obvious avenues, and I'm sure that there are many more obvious avenues for maximal meaningfulness. And now one of the reasons, well, we're living, the modern society is a society in which we can measure many things. We have clocks, we can be punctual. So we can plan very strictly how we maximize the meaningfulness of our lives by using things like clocks and calendars, which is what we do. we make an appointment to be on Zoom at 4:30 on a given day because we have clocks which enable us to do that. And this talk is contributing in a small way to the meaningfulness of at least my life, I hope. All right, now we can measure then along various axes. So we measure in family size, family success measured in diplomas, salary, promotions. I have collecting air miles here, which is one of the ways I do it, and so forth. All of these are measures which we can use, not because having a high salary implies that you have a meaningful life, but because having a meaningful life requires that you have some measure against which to measure your small actions. If you can't measure them, then they're not adding up to anything. So this is a rather key thesis now. Unless you have a life which comes in measured steps which you can measure by an objective measure, even if it's wide only after your death, you're not leading a meaningful life. So this is the basic statement. There are one or two things missing, which I will fill in. So in order to lead a meaningful life, you need to have a plan. It should be possible that you realize that plan, but it should not be too easy. So the problem with the collecting occurrences of words in Shakespeare plan is that it's too easy. It has to be really hard. It has to be something which is difficult for you to realize, but not impossible. It has to be associated with an objective metric or set of metrics, and it has to be such that you're realizing it already now, but you're realizing it more or less continuously. You're always realizing your plan, or you're doing things like eating, which are necessary in order to be able to go back to the realizing of your plan. That's the idea. And now we have some questions, and then I'm finished. This is the pre-antepenultimate slide. So we say objective metrics. So what does objective mean? So it could be that you think I'm wasting my time here. Someone else might think I'm doing very well. I might think I'm doing very well, but someone else might have a different measure. So what does objective mean? I don't know the answer to that question. Does it have to yield value for others? I don't know the answer to that question either. I think probably proving a really difficult mathematical theorem yields value for other mathematicians, but it would still have value even if no other mathematicians heard about it. But again, I'm not sure about the answer to that question. And then finally, did Hitler lead a meaningful life? So if we're not sure about yielding value, I do have an answer to this question, but I'm not going to tell you what it is unless you insist. So that's it. That's the end.
All right, thank you. So I know we've been kind of just like people asking questions when they want. Usually we try to let the students ask some questions before professors jump in. So any students want to jump in? If not, I'll just make it a free for all. All right, then Mariana, did you want to get in?
Sure. I guess my question is, it's not well formed. So, but one point that you mentioned, maybe a meaningful life requires only one plan. And I'm thinking, okay, what if my plan is over? Like I had this plan, I wanted to do X, was all the requirements that you mentioned. Does it mean that from that point on, my life is not meaningful anymore? Does it mean that because I satisfy my plan, but I'm still living, that makes the thing before not meaningful, as in the case of Beethoven and the tennis?
So that's a good question. I really am not happy about being in the dark. So let me try another lighting idea. It's not very good, but still better than the dark.
Can I sort of finish?
Yeah, sure.
And also kind of what kind of normative implications that is have, like thinking about Dworkin idea of Margot. She had a plan for her life, and at one point she getting dementia, that the state of dementia would kind of go against the plan that she had for her life. So it seems that there are, Durkheim draws some normative implications out of that. So I'm thinking, so I'm curious and interested in this idea of, you get to a point, what happens?
Yeah.
If
So I think
yeah.
I can answer the first question quite easily. I need more help from you for the second question. So if you stop because you fulfilled your plan, then you still get meaningfulness points as far as you got. But then the rest of your life is, you should really find another plan in order to keep the score going. That would be my response. So it's not a difficult question.
So
I think the Beethoven tennis question is a difficult one because of the contrast between the meaningfulness that that accrues to Beethoven writing music like Beethoven and the apparent meaninglessness of playing tennis. Although I'm not sure that tennis is so meaningless. It is beautiful sometimes and it's exciting. But now I don't know what the normative point was that Dworkin drew from the Margot case. So can you tell me?
So if I remember correctly, I mean, the idea was, I can't remember how I put it, but the idea with Margot is that she had this sort of, or at least let's imagine a sort of a Margot situation in which she has led a certain kind of life, a certain type of life that requires sort of rational engagement and a certain level of autonomy. As she develops dementia, what kind of sort of how should we interpret that shift? And does it mean that, for instance, if she left sort of some guidelines on how to treat her if
Okay,
she...
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a difficult question. I have a student actually, or he's now a professor, but his thesis is on precisely that sort of question. So hospitals have a duty of care, which means that they should try to maximize the welfare of the patient. Now, what does it mean to maximize the welfare of the patient who is in a coma or who has Alzheimer's? And he develops a theory about this, which is sort of related to this theory, that whatever the patient can do, you should make sure that the environment allows them to realize their capability of doing that thing. And that is sort of normative, but so hospitals typically do not take that attitude to their patients when they're beyond a certain state, a certain mental state. They tend to getting dark again. But I don't have anything very interesting to say. I don't think this has normative implications, except for those people who think, A, that it's important to lead a meaningful life, and B, who are convinced by the kind of account that I've been sketching here. Then it has a normative implication.
Thank you.
So I have people can just raise their hands and I'll try. Mike, did I see that you had a hand earlier? Did you want to go? Okay, I'll go next.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. At the very end, you mentioned the possibility of, you mentioned the question of whether doing good to others would be a criterion for living a meaningful life. And I was wondering whether, independently of whether it's necessary or not, if you think doing good to others could be maybe a defeater or a separate criterion that overrides the criteria you mentioned. So I'm envisioning a situation where somebody doesn't have a plan, but just spontaneously performs actions that have enormous impact, positive impact to others. And it's not a Forrest Gump kind of person. So they don't do it accidentally, they do it on purpose, but it just happens spontaneously. Without any kind of premeditation or plan or project going into it. And it seems to me very counterintuitive to say that that person's life wouldn't be meaningful, even though it doesn't have this well-structured pattern that you see a meaningful life having. So I'm just wondering if you see your theory as allowing exceptions or other other considerations to override the criteria.
So you'd rather took the beef out of your question by saying it wasn't a Forrest Gump kind of case. So as long as there was no Forrest Gump case here, in other words, they're choosing to help others over and over and over again, then each one of those steps does contribute to the meaningfulness of their lives. Now, they would have, according to the approach that I've been defending, a more meaningful life if they were doing this in against the background of a longer term goal. So let me try and describe the story. So you have the kind old lady of the village. She wants to sit at home and read the newspaper but every day she goes out and sees something where she can help someone. Every day. So every day she sees something and she helps somebody, but it's always by accident. She doesn't have a plan to help anybody, not even except insofar as when she sees the person who needs the help, then she creates a plan. So I would say that person is not really leading a meaningful life on the strength of what she does to help other people, because in each case it's an accident. It's a kind of instinctive response to the case in hand, and it's at a very far end of the pole from the Mother Teresa kind, where you have somebody who really does devote her life to helping other people. So I think it doesn't defeat what I'm saying. She does lead a meaningful life in bits and pieces, but it's not adding up to a very high meaningfulness score.
Leo, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, because it was just on my test question. I just thought Schindler in the Schindler List story. So, I mean, the way I remember it, he certainly had no plan. In fact, his motives were not that admirable, but he had a little bit of decency and he saved many, many, many people. So it seems to me that to take points away because he didn't have a plan.
He had a list.
I mean, on a list, but
the list, that's the plan. The list was the plan.
No, the plan was to make money. And but he was not.
But making money is a meaningful activity.
Well, correct, but I think we all find a lot of meaning in the fact that he saved so many people, and the story is interesting to us because it wasn't Mother Teresa. It was not a particularly noble enterprise, just he had enough humanity not to allow for innocent people to be murdered, and then he ended up helping them. So, I mean, I just thought of it because of my test question in the sense, well, here's someone I want to believe without a plan to save people. That wasn't how he ended. How he approached.
Yeah, so he was a good businessman. He was very well organized. He could save all of those people's lives because he had plans for doing all kinds of things, and he had a list which brought it all together. I think he's a very high meaningfulness score case.
So I have sorry, Maite, did you want to respond at all? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But I think I'm trying to think of I'm trying to see if I can think of a concrete example. But I think if the action is high impact enough,
I mean,
it's a one-time action. It doesn't even happen repeatedly. You have a one-time moment of glory where you do something that affects humanity, and it wasn't part of your plan. I think I would, if that was me at the end of my life, I would feel like, yeah, that was a meaningful life.
No, actually, I think that you have a wrong intuition here. So there are such one-off cases, but we regard them as being somehow miserable, I think. And let me try and think of a one-off case. So one-hit wonders, pop groups who just have one hit and then they disappear. We think of them as being sad cases, because we like to think of people who lead lives and not just have one really lucky hit. And if we go back to Schindler, if Schindler did really act in the way that you described, Maite, in other words, he picked up person at random in the street, but without thinking that he was going to do it again and again and again, then we wouldn't regard his life as being so meaningful. It was because he had a plan. And he had a plan because he had a list. So how can I express this? If you have a pop group that has a list of 16 songs that they want to turn into hits, and the first one is a really big hit, but all the others are failures, then we would say that that was a sad case. It was and that's how we deal with those ex-famous pop singers.
Yes, but that's a different example because that's a situation in which somebody tried and failed at something. So they tried to make other hits and failed. I'm thinking of a situation in which I have my own life. Maybe I just read books and watch movies and don't do anything of note. But one day I have a chance to save humanity. I don't know what it would involve, but let's say I get a chance to save humanity, and it's just a matter of like doing something for 1 hour. And I do it, and maybe it takes something that takes skill from me, but it was not premeditated. It's
okay,
just
good.
I decide
right.
to do. Let's say I decide to apply my philosophical skills to solving some problem that will save humanity, and I do it for just 1 hour, and then I go home and continue my life of just like reading books and watching movies.
Yeah, I think that would give you a pretty high score. We could make a film about it. We start with you reading and eating, and then 1 hour, and then you go back to reading and eating. It makes a nice story. So you would get real points for that. Just doing it once is better than doing it by accident a few times.
Right, but
and of course, the fact that you're
you wouldn't
saving.
consider that a counterexample or a.
No,
or an
because you're
exception.
saving humanity, and it takes an hour.
But it wasn't premeditated. There was no goal to do it.
You have to tell me more about how you saved humanity. Did you want to? Did you know that you were doing it at the time? Give me give me some flesh on these bones.
I go out for a walk, and somebody tells me, if you write a paper about why humanity should be saved, and it's convincing enough.
No, you're not convincing me. You're not convincing me.
So I do that, and it's convincing, and humanity is saved.
No, you have. It has to be something we can make a really good film about. That wouldn't make.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, but could I, because it was on Maite's again, Chrisana, I don't want to, if you want to go ahead, I'll come back after you.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
No, take cases of people who are just by accident placed on context in which they do so. The people who overpower the terrorists on that flight 93 or whatever.
Yes.
They were probably going to Vegas to waste money or whatever, but they ended up saving a bunch of people, and they didn't plan it. There was certainly no premeditation, and it happened. And it is arguably the case that they led short but meaningful lives, even though there was no plan. We're stipulating that it was a very good thing and so on and so forth. So there are all sorts of heroic acts, lives that end heroically in ways that the heroes never planned, and to deny them, because you're not forced to deny value to those lives, but you are forced to say they are less valuable than had there be a plan. And that's.
I think there was a plan. In the case of Flight 96, there was a plan. 6 of them were discussing in the back of the plane that they say, look, we know enough now to know that we have to take over this plane. And they realized their plan. And it was a great deed and also very meaningful. And it was a plan. It wasn't an accident.
Well, but now the notion of plan is shrinking to the point that
only for that it has to shrink for the short, quick actions.
Yeah.
And I did say that you maximize meaning by having a lifelong plan, but you can get a big chunk of meaning when you're saving the whole of humanity, even for a short-term plan. And that would indeed did make a quite good film.
But I have 2 different questions. I'll start with the first one because I'm still not sure about the role of success and meaning in a meaningful life. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is that some of what I would consider to be the most meaningful lives are those of kind of activists who didn't mean to become activists, hadn't planned on becoming activists, and then became activists. And they had, in a sense, I don't know if I would say impossible, implausible goals, at least for their own lifetime, of, think of like civil rights activists. My aunt and uncle were civil rights activists, and they did they were successful in a lot of incremental things like protests that had the kind of effect they had hoped on. But, that wasn't just their goal. Their goal was for equal opportunity in the United States for Black people. I mean, that was the goal. And I don't think when they passed that they were under any illusion that they had succeeded in that goal, although they've had many successes. So, and I don't know that, like, had their life been more meaningful if they had took the scope of their goal down and said, well, we're just gonna this is what we want to do, and if that's all we do, then we have lived a meaningful life. So I'm hesitant on this idea that success of the goal is really important.
Okay, so I think that I'm optimistic enough to think that we will one day be able to say that success was achieved, and that the civil rights movement was a crucial part of that success. It's just like Aristarchus; it may take a long time. So the arguments that you're putting forward to me now make me think that maybe I overemphasize the idea of meaningful life, and maybe I should insert into the argument the dimension of a meaningful action or a meaningful phase in a life, maybe an hour long. So that would be one action. And then the civil rights activists, they spent weeks and months, years in some cases, I would imagine. So having those meaningful actions in the life makes the life meaningful. Having more of those makes it more meaningful. And I don't think that case is an argument against the kind of view I was defending. I just defended it and overemphasized the long-lastedness of the effort. But I did say that you need, even if you have a plan which is a lifelong plan, you still need to eat and sleep. That's because the eating and sleeping are life necessities. Now, in a certain situation, becoming a part of the civil rights movement would become a life necessity for some people. And so they would put their life plan on the back burner and attend to the more urgent goals, and thereby acquire a new plan, which could become a new life plan in some cases. They would devote their lives to politics.
I think that's helpful. If I could just follow up on that. But even if, I don't know, let's say they had a shorter life and they weren't able to see any of their successes, I guess I still feel like, unlike with the one-hit one, and I mean, I'm not to say that musicians' lives aren't very important and meaningful, but I'm just saying, unlike that one-hit wonder, it still seems like there's meaning in the goal and the action towards that particular, these kinds of goals, right? And that even when not successful, or if not successful, there's meaning in doing the action. There's meaning.
Good.
Yeah.
So I was rather suggesting, in fact, I was quite explicitly suggesting that failure would take away from meaning. So let's consider your apparently reasonable counterexample to that. Namely, we have an activist movement, which is in and of itself doing something which is good, but which fails to achieve its end. Do the members of that movement lead meaningful lives in virtue of having engaged in a failed activist movement? Off the top of my head, I would say no. It failed. It was it's a bit like trying to learn to ride a bicycle and failing. You keep falling off. Leo?
My intuition is very different on that one, but what is Leo going to say? Go ahead, Leo.
Well, no, that I think that Barry's own basically infinite time frame negates this line, because it could be that they failed in their lifetime, but they plan to see that 5 centuries from then they will have succeeded. Therefore, you cannot claim.
I know, but remember, we were taking it as a presupposition of the argument that they failed. Basta. In the future, from any point in time, they were regarded as having failed.
Right.
So it was a flat Earth movement or something. Flat Earthist activists.
But you clearly have to be open to the possibility that they failed during their lifetime.
Oh, absolutely, I get that. We already accepted that. That clearly the measure may be such that it can only be applied posthumously.
I just want to jump in though and say that but the activists for a movement like the civil rights activists wouldn't be engaging in an activity like the flat earth movement, because there's truth. And I mean, in addition to the moral element, there's also a truth that they're pursuing, right? And that the fact that the rest of the society hasn't come around to that truth, even if they never come around to that truth, there is not only, I think, meaningfulness in the action towards towards making the world more moral, but also towards truth. And so I just want to point out, I don't think that the flat earth activists would have meaning in the same way, not because of failure, but because they're not pursuing a true goal. I mean, let alone a moral goal, if that makes sense.
I'm trying to think of an example that would be convincing for either of us, which would involve both truth and failure, truth and high moral value and failure. So let's take activists against Hitler in the 1930s in Germany. So did the people who lost their lives in campaigning and marching and so forth against Hitler in the 1930s lead meaningful lives? They failed, of course, but I think we would say they did lead meaningful lives, because in the long run, we realized that Hitler was a monster. And they saw it beforehand. They were heroes. So that would not count as failure. It was just a success, but it took longer. Looking back, they were doing the right thing. They led meaningful lives because, looking back, we can see that they were doing the right thing. Where flat earthists marching through Berlin, we would never be in a position to look back and say that they were doing the right thing.
So then that almost seems to suggest that what's doing the work here is still truth, and that success has not as much to do with getting everybody to see the truth, but just your success at doing something truthful. And so therefore, I mean, it almost then builds it in that if you are an activist in pursuit of a morally good, goal, as if you've hit upon something that is true, even if you're never successful in in achieving it, you have succeeded insofar as you have reached the truth, even if no one else ever.
So I think you've convinced me. So we know that there were not a lot of people, but some people who just felt that they had to protest against what Hitler was doing, even though they knew that that would cause not only their own deaths, but the deaths of their family members in principle. There were some people who did that, and I think we think that they led meaningful lives. And I think we have to do some possible world semantics now. I think we would still think that even if Hitler had won and we were all now living in a Nazi world, we would still, qua philosophers looking at this thing abstractly, say that they led meaningful lives because they stood up already then against the consequences that we were all now living under. Mm-hmm. But we're not allowed to say it, of course. Who knows who's listening?
Thank you. Other
But
thoughts?
can I don't know, Chrisana, can I relate to the, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So maybe this has been covered already, but the case of Christopher Columbus. So I would say intuitively, he led a meaningful life. He had a plan. With multiple steps, he went through them. He thought he reached his plan, succeeded. He didn't. But what he did was still quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Because of what we know, and he never know.
Yeah.
Never know.
And he did succeed in realizing many parts of his plan. He did find land to the west of the Eurasian landmass.
The reason why we think it's meaningful, really, really meaningful, is because what was actually discovered, something they didn't know he discovered. But
yes, but all the other things he did. So there were many obstacles which had to be overcome, and he was the first to overcome many of those obstacles. Even just getting the money for the expedition. So it was a long plan, a big plan, and most of it succeeded. The one thing which didn't quite succeed is that he got the continent wrong. But that wasn't his fault.
No, I guess I get it. But if I can sort of, Chrisana's suggestion was that the truth is what really should lead the intuition that.
Yeah, but there is a lot of truth here. That's the point. So
but not in the meaning.
Got 99. No, the fact that he didn't find India is not important. The fact that he found a continent to the west of the Eurasian landmass is what is important. He just thought it was India. He found the continent.
Yeah, so his project it was misconceived from the start.
Only in one respect.
Project that happened to lead.
Only in one respect. So in many respects, he thought that you could navigate and find land by going west.
Yeah, I know, sure, yeah.
And he was right.
Could I ask another question if there's no one else?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, I mean, this emphasis on the plan, I think that part of the damage I wanted to cause on your argument, I have already caused, because you are now basically a plan could last a couple of seconds. But I'll give a concrete example of one that is even shorter than the flight 93 or whatever the flight was. And this is on another plane. I don't know if you remember, there was a shoe bomber. Some guy wanted to blow up the plane on a shoe. And I saw an interview on TV with some Dutch movie director who was on that plane and who overpowered this guy. And he was being interviewed on TV and treated like a hero. And then the guy replied and said, "What hero? I'm on a plane and there's a guy sitting next to me lighting himself on fire. I mean, the only thing any person would do is just to overpower him." And in a way, I thought it was very humble of him, but also true. And I hope I would have done the same, but it's very likely the case that any of us would have just tried to, prevent this guy from setting himself on fire on a plane. Now, you could, of course, play the game and say, well, that's the plan right there for a nanosecond.
Yeah.
But by now, that's unrecognizable as a plan.
Okay, no. I think I'm still in good shape. So if we agree that it's important to try and lead a meaningful life, that we should not lead a life which might lead to suicide of the egoistic kind, then with the next question is, well, how do I lead a meaningful life? How do I maximize the likelihood that I will lead a meaningful life? Well, I have a plan. Early in my life, I study, I go to university, I get all the skills I need. I buy the land, I build the factory, I invent the new kind of magic gizmo and lead a meaningful life. Now, that's what you can do by long-term planning. But then things are going to happen along the way. You're going to run out of vegetables and you need to go to the grocer. That's a short-term plan, realizing it doesn't contribute anything to the meaningfulness of your life. But along the way to the grocer, you can save somebody's life, and they leave you millions of dollars in their will, and then you can realize your factory much better. And so you lead a more meaningful life because of a small plan that you made along the way.
Yeah, except that overpowering this guy is not buying groceries in the supermarket. So even if we now tinker with it, and the guy died just after he gave the guy who saved the plane died immediately after the interview, we would say, okay, just on that basis that he saved all these innocent people on that plane, he led a meaningful life.
Yeah, so there is a way, and I agree that I did not take account of this in the talk, but there is a way in which you can win a meaningfulness jackpot. So, but you shouldn't bet your life on winning the jackpot. You should have a plan.
Yeah.
And then occasionally some people will win the jackpot. And then there are the activists.
So I have another question, and people should just jump in or raise your hands. I don't want to, like leave anybody out. But since I didn't see any hands, I'll go ahead and ask my other question. So I'll preface it by saying I like plans, and I think plans are really great and meaningful. However, I'm like a little bit, I think the part that I'm like unsure about is that this idea that if you figure out your plan at 19 and you stick with it and you go through, you live a nice long life and you're exercising and successful at this plan, that it's going to be maximally meaningful. And the reason I'm skeptical about that is
Beethoven.
Yeah, no, I mean, Beethoven had, I think, probably a very meaningful life. And especially on that measure, he would have a meaningful life. But I think that it leaves out that there's something. I think there can be a lot of meaning derived, and I'll try to explain what I have in mind. Meaning derived in not having that plan right off the bat, and all of these unexpected experiences that you have that may lead you to a plan, or just unexpected experiences, not part of the plan, that I think inform kind of like the way that your life takes shape. And I don't mean experiences like I got ice cream and that was really pleasurable and fun and made me happy. I'm talking about there are experiences that have meaning that were not because of a plan. And I'm thinking, and the reason I'm thinking this is I'm going back to the experience machine that you're talking about. And this is just intuition, but my intuition that what would bother me about being in the machine isn't so much that the things are happening to me and I'm just passive and it wasn't part of my own plan that I've activated, but because I, in some real sense, am not experiencing, like you pointed out, reality, right? It's like, it's not true what's happening to me. So I think that's the part that I'm just very skeptical, that like the person who kind of tripped through their early 20s trying to figure things out didn't have a meaningful life up to that point at all. And it wasn't until they got into their 30s and found their plan and then took off. It's like, oh, too bad you didn't figure that out earlier. That would have been more meaningful. I'm very skeptical about that. So.
Okay, so we would have been nice if we had more symphonies from Beethoven.
Yeah.
And is it you that was wasting their 20s and only found your plan when you were 30? Oh, is that what you were saying?
Probably my early 20s. I found philosophy earlier than my 30s.
Okay, so it would have been good if you had done more philosophy already from your early 20s, wouldn't it?
I don't think so. I really don't, because here's why. One of the reasons why. What I bring to my plan, and now I'm not even sure I have one, but what I bring to my plan in doing philosophy right now, I think, is greatly informed by all of the other kinds of things I did when I was early. I don't think that those things...
You were lucky. That your pre-planned life contributed positively to your post-planned life. That's fine. We allow that.
But I also don't think, this isn't so much just because of my own personal narrative. I'm just thinking a lot of some of our greatest stories, right, are of these people who didn't know what they were going to do, but were greatly informed by kind of their pre-plan era.
So give me your best. I give you Beethoven for what's your best example?
That's a good, give me a little bit. I hadn't thought. I didn't come with handy examples, so let me think about it. But I know there are, because those are like the great. You were just talking about great stories, right? Some of the great stories are how people trip into these life paths.
Yeah, but you should have one off the top of your head if they're so common
I haven't been
and
thinking
impressive.
I will let Greg ask a question, and
He
then I
has
will.
one.
I have a good example. Steve Jobs took a calligraphy class in college, and then that like 10 years later or so, it helped him with like.
Okay, that's a
something
good
that happened.
example. But then by being in college, Steve Jobs was already following a plan. So it's not such a good example. It's part of a general plan to improve yourself by going to college, and then you get a job. And if you're lucky, you can use what you learned in college to do your job better. And if you're really lucky, you will have done those things in college, which you will need in order to realize the plan that you take later.
So thank you for that example, Greg. So, but then this leads me, Barry, to like a question, another question, I guess, because the way you just answered Greg makes it sound like what's important is having a plan, not necessarily a plan to revolutionize technology.
Okay, good. This is another dimension which actually I had. We have written down. So Berit and I did write some of this down a long time ago. Plans mature. So you start off with a very general plan. I want to go to college. I want to get educated. And then I want to do philosophy. I want to do logic. I want to do logic in order to be able to do computer programming better in this way. And then I want to join this company because they will allow me to show them what my way of programming computers can do, and so forth. So it's the same plan, but it's getting more and more precise as time goes by. As you experience things from the outside, but also as the plan gets applied in its next phase. It's just that you can't know the details of the next phases at the beginning. And a lot of it, or some of it, will depend on luck, happenstance.
And by the same logic, couldn't you argue that Beethoven's first career and then him playing tennis, like that was all one collective plan?
That's the reason why that example is so intriguing, because there's no plan which could start with, I'm going to be a great composer, and then I'm going to take up tennis. That's why I chose that example. I could probably find a better example, which is more historically reasonable. But that would be an incoherent plan mix, which would take away meaningfulness points from poor Beethoven's life. But he didn't do it, of course. He was not. He stuck it through to the end.
Couldn't you define his meaning in like some greater overarching sense? I mean, this sounds a little absurd, but like, you know, if to make music and then to play tennis, neither of those were your true meanings, and perhaps maybe something like one view I really like is like to bear the greatest burden you can, and do it with pride, like just some other meaning.
Okay, then I will pursue that thought. You give me a real world example of it. So what's his name? The sports. He is sponsored by Nike all the time.
Michael Jordan. Yeah,
Michael Jordan. He switched.
He played
from one
baseball
sport.
for a couple years. Yeah.
So, but there was clearly some kind of a plan in those switches. He wanted to prove things. They were coherent. Beethoven music to tennis would not be coherent in any sense, and there's no audience that he would be proving to. Leaving aside the fact that there was no tennis when Beethoven was alive. So Michael Jordan is a good example of the switching, and I can't think of a good example of a radical switching like music to tennis. There may be one, but I can't think of one.
I mean, I am roughly in agreement with what you're saying, but I don't get what exactly is incoherent in a full sense of tennis and music. I mean, again, in a rough sense, yeah, I get the point. But I mean, maybe someone would actually combine tennis and music in ways we never thought had much to recommend them, and it would work. I mean,
that's a bad argument.
well,
That's like Wittgenstein's. Maybe there are people behind the mountain somewhere who measure the value of carpets by the height of the piles.
okay, so I used to play squash, and I used to play squash against a guy who was a stockbroker, and then he claimed that whatever was happening in the court between us was what he applied in the stock market. This is a true story of me. I certainly never got any stock tips.
I buy that story.
But that's what he said. And, stock trading and playing squash seem to have zero in common. And in this guy's mind, they combined and he made a lot of money. And I mean, I have no idea what he was talking about. But again, as I began by saying, with this, I am roughly in agreement with you, but I still am troubled by the sense of incoherence.
Yeah, so Beethoven might have played tennis on the side to keep himself fit for the music. And your stockbroker, he was playing tennis to keep himself fit for the stockbroking. It's perfectly coherent. And fit for the stockbroking meant also that he could think about possible good deals.
Yeah.
And maybe Beethoven on the tennis court was thinking about possible good symphonies.
I mean, this may be just a complete intuitive bias, but it does seem like there's something meaningful and valuable about experiences that this kind of like, you make a plan at 19 and then even if it evolves, you've got this like tunnel vision of like, this is what I'm going to do. And you're really great at it and you're really successful. And I don't, it just kind of, I'm saying there's anything wrong with it. It's just that the idea that that's the maximally meaningful life as opposed to one that has multiple experiences and considers multiple avenues of where their life's going to go. I don't know. It doesn't.
Beethoven.
Yeah, but I mean, look, so love is music. But I don't know that is a like the fact that it's maximally productive. I mean, and I didn't think that's how we were thinking about this. Because if we're thinking of a maximally meaningful life as a maximally productive life.
Well, no, even Beethoven, we could say that his deafness at the end added to the meaningfulness of his life. And that was a handicap.
Right.
It makes his single-minded obsession with realizing this one plan, which Mozart started at the age of 8 or something, that's what makes his life so meaningful. The plan is there from the beginning to the end. And it was the same with Steve Jobs. It's the same with what's his name, the Tesla person, Elon Musk. Elon Musk realizes his plan in all directions, but he has a single-minded plan, and it's not just to get rich. It's to show all these bastards that he can do things they thought was impossible.
But then we really have walked away, though, from like the connection to truth and things like that to like just a maximally meaningful life is one that is maximally impactful or maximally.
No. I still think that the idea of truth arises where we are dealing with, for instance, a fake Elon Musk who makes claims that are not held up, or we're dealing with somebody who makes shoddy driverless cars. Maybe he does that. So the truth factor is still here. So even if you have all the razzmatazz in the world and everyone thinks you're successful, if it turns out that the gadget that you were supposed to have invented doesn't work, or that it breaks after 6 months, it takes away all the meaningfulness. You're back to square one. A one-hit wonder, but this time without even one hit.
Well, thank you so much. I'm even more disappointed now that we're not in person, and because I think this would have been a great dinner conversation to extend. But thank you so much.
I'm not allowed to have dinner. That deviates from the plan.